In our February issue of Outlook Business magazine, we turn the spotlight on India's startup ecosystem, its ambition, its speed, and the big promises it makes about the future. But while working on this issue, we noticed something unsettling. Despite all the hype around artificial intelligence, unicorn valuations, and global buzz, India still doesn't have a single growth stage AI startup, not one that has crossed Series B funding. None. So we stopped and asked, what's holding us back? Is it a lack of capital, a lack of patience, or a deeper problem? That question shaped one of the most important parts of our February issue. To understand why Outlook Business chose to take a hard look at India's AI and deep tech gap, we are going behind the scenes with Neeraj Thakur, editor Outlook Business, and Deepsekhar Choudhary, associate editor, in this episode of Editor's Take.
Mr. Thakur, India is a poor country. Our per capita income today is around $3,000. Do you think it's practical for us to have deep tech aspirations that rival the US and China's?
Deep, I will answer this question by asking a question to you. Look at all the developed nations in the world. There are so many. You go to Europe, Sweden, Germany, Denmark, so many other countries. Then you go to Middle East. You have UAE, so many other Middle Eastern countries. Then you look at United States of America. If you come to Asia, Japan is there. But how many of these countries are either superpower or wanting to be a superpower? I don't think there are many, except for China, US. Russia is there, even though Russia is not very rich, but far better off compared to India. So yes, India is a poor nation when we look at other developed nations, but at the same time, India has the ambition of becoming a superpower. And that is why it is essential for us to understand that how nations become superpower. No superpower in this world has reached that status without having control over the frontier technologies. And in today's world, if we discuss frontier technologies, it is deep tech, robotics, semiconductors, AI. And there is a lot of investment going on in these technologies by different nations in Europe, in the US, in China. And India at the moment is not in that race. Yes, we are trying, but then if you just look at the amount of money we are spending in R&D, it makes us a laggard in this race. And at the present level of investment in our R&D, it would be very difficult for us to be anywhere in this competition. So that's why it doesn't matter where we are in terms of our per capita income. What matters is our ambition. So if our ambition is of becoming a civilizational power, we will have to invest in R&D. I'll give you some data. In PPP terms, China's R&D spend in 2024 was $780 billion. Compared to $830 billion by the US. Now, if you look at the per capita income difference, it's huge between China and the US, but still, look at how China is breathing down the neck of United States. China currently spends 2.6% of its GDP on R&D, whereas if you just look at India, India spends only 0.6 to 0.7%. China is the only country in the world, among large economies, which never reduced its R&D spend, and they have been doing it for the last 3 decades. That's why when the US announced that there is something called OpenAI which has come up with the ChatGPT chatbot, China came up with DeepSeek. Why do you think they were able to do so? Because they were investing in R&D for a very long period of time, going against the logic that a certain amount of per capita income requires only a certain amount of investment in R&D. If you do not invest in R&D today, you would never be in a position to take on the larger economies to ever become a developed nation. So it's a call that the country has to take, and that's why we are evaluating India's dreams of becoming superpower against what they are doing actually to become superpower.
Last week, there was a huge rout of $1 trillion in global software and services stocks. India's IT companies also took a beating in the stock market, and this happened because of fears over what AI will do to the sector. Do you think that India's IT companies have not been responsible enough in being investing more in R&D, and that's why today we are kind of backwards in AI?
There are two ways of looking at this question. First of all, yes, of course, Indian IT companies have not been investing in R&D, but they are just following the trend of larger India Inc. culture, because in India we have never had a culture of investing in R&D. We always believed that just labor arbitrage will get us there, because most of our companies, they decided to either remain very protective, they never went out in the world to compete, or if in the case of IT sector companies that were actually going out, they just focused on the labor arbitrage business model. And yes, so you can say that Indian IT companies have not invested, but at the same time, I would want you to just look at what they have done for India in the last 30 years. I think they account for $200 billion worth of exports from IT services exports from India, and this amount of forex has actually allowed India to purchase oil from outside, and it has created India's middle class. And you also need to look at these companies where they came from, like in 80s, when India actually did not have that kind of cash flow on their balance sheet. So these companies came up with a business model that allowed them an entry point in the global services exports. But 30 years down the line, there are so many companies in India. In fact, so many billionaires are coming out of India, and they are the chairman, and they are on the boards of India's biggest companies. None of them have actually ever felt the need of investing in R&D, because Indian model of capitalism is actually a rent-seeking capitalism, and just labor arbitrage capitalism, where we have never thought of conquering the world through technologies. So we need to accept this thing that to an extent that IT companies are responsible for the same thing, but they have done the job. If you just look at the interview given by Mr. Narayan Murthy, former Infosys chairman, to us in this issue of Outlook Business, he has actually said that the new age founders, the new age startup founders, should not settle for becoming the back-end office of the world, because when he started his company long ago, I would just compare him to someone coming from a very poor background and trying to do something for their kids, their family, and with whatever capital they had at their disposal. So at that point in time, India had only that much of space, only that much of capital. So they have done their job. Now these companies are, just on a threshold where they may not be in a position to innovate so much. But then there are so many other companies that have much larger cash flows on their balance sheets, but still they are not investing in R&D. So it's a collective call that India Inc. needs to take, including the IT sector or the chemical sector or the automobile sector, where all the sectors taken together, where they will have to invest in R&D.
So I think India Inc.'s R&D is at 0.4% of revenues.
Yes, like 0.7%. It keeps changing, and even the biggest companies among the Nifty 50, they just are not willing to spend money. They do acquire some startups. They do believe that spending money in acquisition of technology is better than spending money on R&D and coming up with their own technology. And this thought process needs to change, because while acquisition is good, but if you just look at Nvidia, if you look at so many other companies in the US or even the US or in China, these companies have invested in their own technology. Acquisition can get you somewhere, but that R&D should be part of your culture, which is not the case currently in any Indian company, except for some in pharmaceutical sector. But it needs to be a larger culture in India Inc.
While our startup special ranks the best growth stage startups in India across sectors like D2C, fintech, aerospace, etc., it also criticizes the top ranked growth stage companies for not being innovative enough. So, are we trying to celebrate our best growth stage companies in this issue, or are we dissing them?
Well, Deep, see, if you just look at the culture of Outlook Business, we are not there to do PR for companies. While we do celebrate India's tech ecosystem, but our job is to be a critic of the tech ecosystem as well. And our job is not just of marketing a certain number of companies every year just to earn some revenue. Our job is that of critique. And if we were to only say good things about these companies or the entire ecosystem, we would not be doing our job as a media organization. And that's why even in these rankings where we have celebrated the best performing companies within the ecosystem, we are just telling through data that what is missing in India's tech ecosystem. I'll give you some data. Out of the top 30 ranked companies in Outlook Outperformers, only 9 hold any kind of patent. So while India is trying to be a superpower, India has ambitions of competing with the best in the world. If our growth stage companies do not invest in any kind of patents, or they're just not bothered, we need to call it out. Then out of 117 unicorns in India, 101 have no patents. And the entire unicorn cohort owns just 229 patents as of April 2025. And even in this cohort, mostly are concentrated in 2 EV firms, that is Ola Electric and Ether Energy. What does it tell about India's ecosystem? Because as I said in my previous answer, that Indian capitalism has always been about rent seeking. Indian capitalism has always been about labor arbitrage, because of course people are poor here, you get cheap labor, and we just tend to focus on the easy way out. But then we need to understand that as a nation, if we want to become a superpower, there is no easy way out. We will have to struggle, we will have to fight with the best. And our economy needs to open up to the extent that we compete with the best in the world. We cannot remain under the protective umbrella of government of India and then just think that we will conquer the world. What we have done in these rankings, we have provided evidence that there is not a single growth stage AI startup in India. And now ChatGPT came like 3 to 4 years ago. And if still we are not able to produce startups that reach growth stage in generative AI segment, it's a cause of concern. Because while we are celebrating deep tech ecosystem day in and day out, every day there are events across the country. But we actually need to take a deep dive into the data, that what is happening in India's AI ecosystem. Is it that we are just celebrating events across the country, or is it that our startups are trying to do something? I'm not saying that nobody is trying to do this thing. It is quite possible, and it is possible because we have spoken with so many startup founders who are actually trying to do a good job with R&D, with generative AI technology, but they are just not getting the interest of the investors. So it is a comment on India's investor community as well, that what is it that they are looking for? Why is it that they only want to invest in particular kind of startups, the what we call them, the ice cream startups? Something that was criticized by India's commerce minister last year, because at this point of time, if India is getting into trade deals with different countries, the government of India needs to have startups, needs to have companies that are producing frontier technologies. That's how you get into good trade deals. If that is not the scenario, India would always be getting a raw deal from these FTAs that we are trying to negotiate. And remember, now the world order is changing, and unless and until our ecosystem gets serious about competing with the best, it would be very difficult for India to harbor any kind of dreams of becoming a superpower.
You said this thing that investors are still betting on these so-called ice cream startups. But broadly speaking, India's unicorns have done very well. There are over 115 of them now, and over 24 or almost that many have gone public in the last few years. So they are making money for their growth stage investors, for their early stage investors. Then where do you think the problem lies? Do you think there is some mismatch in kind of the incentives we give to our investors in India and the outcomes that we want as a nation?
See, Deep, it's not about the wrong kind of incentive because IPOs are required, because without providing IPOs, it would be very difficult to get early stage investors because they have a certain time period, in that period they need exit. So the fact that Indian stock market is so mature that it is able to provide exit to even to early stage investors in loss making companies, it's a sign of a mature economy. But at the same time, we need to understand, our startup founders need to understand that IPO is just a milestone, it's not the destination. Because we have seen with a lot of founders in India in recent past that their journey, it was perhaps just increasing the valuations. And that's the reason EdTech was completely decimated. The same thing happened in FinTech also. So many companies, they just struggled in that journey and they just kept on increasing their valuation and they just forgot that, that their ultimate destination was perhaps creating the Google and Facebook out of India. When we talk to these founders, when they are young, early stage startups or even growth stage startups, they are all wanting to become Elon Musk. But the moment they see a few thousand crore rupees in their pockets, they just completely lose their minds. And that is when the harm begins, because Indian founders need to have the vision of the next 50 to 100 years to be able to make Google and Facebook out of India. It's saying and talking big things is one thing, and actually having that long-term vision is another thing. The problem with India's ecosystem has been that we have seen this thing. I'm not saying that out of the blue. We have seen this thing, how so many young founders have they have just wasted the good start that they got. And that's how you lose the confidence of the investors, be it the institutional investors or the retail investors. So it's also about the culture. I think Government of India is doing the right thing when they have actually reprimanded the ecosystem for not doing enough to produce those deep tech startups. Because at the end of the day, it is the Googles and Facebooks of the world that have made US what it is today. And they have always been ahead in terms of producing these kind of frontier technologies. And unless and until Indian startup founders think long term, unless and until they do stop thinking of IPOs as a place where they will become rich and they will get entry into the rich man's club, it would be very difficult for India to achieve its dreams of becoming a superpower, because at the end of the day, in modern day economies, it's not the armies which are deciding the fate of nations, it is the businesses. And that was something that was this kind of modern economy was created during East India Company itself, because the rise of colonialism in the world was on the back of East India Company and so many other companies from European countries. So India needs to understand that at the government level, that they need to incentivize only those founders, only those promoters that have a long-term vision, that are willing to take risk, to sacrifice their present for the sake of tomorrow. Otherwise, why should any loss-making company make it to the stock market? Because at the end of the day, you are actually putting all the risk on the retail investors who are putting their life savings by investing in these startups. So unless and until the founders have that kind of vision, I think Government of India needs to ensure that not every company is able to do that IPO, because it's a risky business. And while Indian stock market has been expanding for the last many years, but if there are too many companies that go bust and or that end up destroying the value of retail investors, it would be very bad for the long-term prospects of Indian stock markets as well as India's economy.
When we started this ranking process, there was an internal debate that we had, that should we rank companies which are headquartered maybe in the US or any other foreign jurisdiction, but the founders are largely Indian, and the company has most of its employees in Bengaluru or any other Indian city. However, you were against that. what is the reason?
Well, Deep, NVIDIA employs about 10,000 people in India, right? Now, would you call it an Indian company or a US company? There are GCCs in India, Global Capability Centers. There are about 2 million Indians employed in those GCCs. Whatever technologies they are producing, whatever IPs they are creating for those companies, do you think those IPs are getting created for India? Because if that were the case, US President Donald Trump would not have put controls on the type of chips that gets exported out of the US made by NVIDIA to different countries, including India. See, modern day capitalism is about holding on to the frontier technologies, the important technologies that give nations advantage in global trade over other nations. Every country is doing this thing, and unless and until your biggest companies are domiciled in India, they're getting taxed in India, they're producing IP that can be controlled in terms of the priorities of a nation, strategic autonomy. It would not be possible for India to become a developed nation. So that's why it is very important to rank only those companies as Indians that are producing technologies for India that can be controlled by government of India, if need be. While we all want globalization, we all want a world where technologies are used by all countries just freely, but that has not been the case. We all know that globalization is dead, and that's why, giving you a reference from the famous series Game of Thrones, I would like to say that the Indian unicorn founders, they need to understand that they are the children of a long summer, and now the winter is coming. So India better gets prepared to deal with this kind of a world, and we as a country, as a publication that is analyzing India's tech ecosystem, need to be very well aware of this demarcation between what is Indian and what is not Indian. That doesn't mean that we are not appreciating the fact that so many people get employed in foreign companies, but at the same time, those companies are not Indian, and whatever tax benefits Government of India announces, they need to announce those tax benefits keeping in mind their long-term vision for the country's Viksit Bharat mission.
Thank you for watching this segment. To read the full cover story, check out Outlook Business Magazine February issue, now on stands.